What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at the best player from every decade, from the 60s all the way to current day, and we're going to see who the best player from each decade are. Our player from the 60s is Jim Brown. Brown played from 1957 to 1965. In his 9 seasons played, he was a 9-time Pro Bowler and an 8-time first-team All-Pro. He led the league in rushing 8 times. He was back-to-back MVP in 1957 and 1958 on top of another MVP in 1965, his last year. He racked up a total of 12,000 yards in his career, averaging an impressive 5.2 yards per carry, and he had 106 rushing touchdowns. That's more than Barry Sanders. That 106 rushing touchdowns was a record that stood for years. Including receiving, he had 1,600 total yards and 126 touchdowns. What made Jim Brown really special was his consistency. With a 17-game season, we can only imagine what he would have done. Going into the 1970s, we have Terry Bradshaw. Terry started his rookie season in 1970 and played all the way until 1983. Over that time, he was a 4-time Super Bowl champion, both of them back-to-back. And what gave him the edge over Ed Too Tall Jones was his clutch performances in the Super Bowl, on the biggest stage when the lights were the brightest. It wasn't just about championships for Terry Bradshaw either. He had impressive stats as well, throwing just under 28,000 passing yards and 212 touchdowns. But the regular season wasn't his bread and butter. It was his playoff performances that really put him in this list. He threw over 3,800 yards and 30 passing touchdowns in the playoffs, with an incredible 14-5 record. Going on to the 1980s, there's so many players we could put here. In an era with amazing quarterbacks, Jim Kelly, John Elway, Dan Marino, Joe Montana, we're going to go with Joe Montana's number one weapon in Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice played an incredible 20 seasons and still is tied for the most 1,000-yard seasons in a row. But his dominance in the 80s was unhinged. Rice was a big part of the 3 Super Bowl winning teams that he was a part of. He was named Super Bowl MVP and Triple Crown. It seemed like no stage was too big for Jerry Rice. Now let's talk about his statistical records. He holds the record for most career receptions, most career receiving yards, and almost every receiving statistic in the playoffs. He was a postseason magnet, racking up 151 receptions, 2,300 yards, and 22 touchdowns. Another thing you have to mention about Jerry Rice is his unparalleled work ethic. Going into the 90s, we have another skill position. Barry Sanders has to be the 90s. In his 10 seasons, he was a 10-time Pro Bowler. That's crazy. Additionally, a 6-time first-team All-Pro, and an NFL MVP winner of 1997. He won the NFL Offensive Player of the Year in 94 and 97, and statistically has the best 10-year stretch out of any running back ever. He rushed for almost 1,600 yards and just under 100 touchdowns. To understand how amazing the best running back of all time actually is, look at his scrimmage yards. These numbers are disgusting. To this day, Barry Sanders is the best running back of all time, and he only needed 10 years to cement that. Now that we're out of the 90s, we're going into the double zeros. Tom Brady, the absolute GOAT. Oh no, your starting quarterback's injured. It's alright, you got Tom Brady. He leads the Patriots that year to a Super Bowl. And then 2 years later, he goes back-to-back. It's a no-brainer with 3 Super Bowls that Tom Brady's the best player of this decade. In total, Brady had 7 Super Bowls, 5 Super Bowl MVPs, and was a Pro Bowler 15 times. Just under 90,000 total yards and 650 touchdowns. He wasn't just a great player, he elevated great players. His team was constantly in the dance. His football IQ is unmatched. On top of the undefeated season in 2007, shout out Dolphins, he clearly is the best player from this decade. Next up, we have the household name of Aaron Rodgers. Even with his questionable off-the-field antics, he's a 4-time MVP and dominated the 2010s. With a Super Bowl win in the 2010s, and some of the best passing seasons we have ever seen, with over 60,000 passing yards, over 500 passing touchdowns, and barely over 100 interceptions, you gotta put him in the 2010s. Ignoring what he's doing with the Jets right now, he's an absolute legend. And finally, the current best player. Are we surprised? It's Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is an absolute animal. He is a back-to-back Super Bowl champion, 3-time Super Bowl champion, 3-time Super Bowl MVP, 2-time MVP, 1-time Offensive Player of the Year. He had a 50 passing touchdown season. He's beaten Josh Allen 4 times in the playoffs. Sorry, Bills fans. And he has owned the league since he's joined. 7 straight AFC Championship appearances, which is second all time. To be in the conversation as the GOAT already at 28 years old, the same conversation as Joe Montana and Tom Brady, you know you're doing something right. Like, comment, and subscribe.